welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Welcome everybody to another episode of the Turn the Page podcast. My name is Kaye. I'm one of the librarians here. I work in the Reader Services Department, and I have the absolute pleasure to interview for the second time one of my favorite authors. And I would like for her to introduce herself, and then we'll talk about her newest book.
Hi, I'm Olivia Dade. I am a romance author, and I'm absolutely delighted to be back to chat with you again. And Reader's Advisory, when I was a librarian, was my favorite. So I think that you're a fantastic person to talk to.
Oh, thanks. So we had our title swap yesterday because I did finish reading your newest book, which is called At First Spite. And I finished it because I got the NetGalley like 2 months ago. And yesterday I was like screaming about it at the title swap. I was like, it's really good and it comes out next week and we're doing the interview. So that's, it's all related. And I do try to push some like unconventional romances at some people and things that are new and fun and exciting, which is exactly how I describe all of your books.
Thank you so much for reading my book and being, kind and enthusiastic about it. I appreciate it.
Thanks. Yep, my coworker yesterday described me as an Olivia Dade evangelist. So
have you heard the good news of At First Spite?
And actually, since our last interview, I've read all of your books. And I've enjoyed every single one of them. I got my favorites here and there. At First Spite is definitely going on the favorite list, top 5, I want to say. So we should probably talk about it. Let's go about it. So what is At First Spite about?
At First Spite is a story of Athena, who's a woman who was engaged to be married, and her engagement ends about a month before the wedding. And due to circumstances, or what some people call capital R, romance reasons, she is forced to move into a 10-foot wide spite house, which we can discuss what that is later, that she bought for her ex-fiance as a wedding gift because she really doesn't have any other options. And that 10-foot wide house is actually only a wall away from her ex-fiance and only a 4-foot alleyway away from his older brother, who happens to be the person who convinced her ex-fiance to leave her. So once she's there, she decides to take some petty revenge, because revenge is a dish best served petty, she would say, and then finds maintaining her anger increasingly difficult for a number of reasons. And of course, they fall in love because it's a romance.
Of course, yeah. Can't have it.
It's her and the older brother, not her ex-fiance.
Correct.
Yes.
I actually enjoyed that the ex-fiance was absent for most of the book, which was wonderful because it definitely gave Athena like a chance to kind of heal from that and learn from it without him being around, which I thought was cool. But I also wanted to say I love how spiteful Athena is.
She's not mean about it.
No.
I mean, I want to be, and that was something I tried to tread the line, like things that were petty and funny, but not mean. So like one of the things she did, which was one of my favorite bits, was that she called up all the local multi-level marketing companies like Avon and Tupperware, like Lululemon, whatever, like all the and like told all of them that, gave his number and address and said he wanted to host parties. So, and that if he said no right away, they should keep trying to convince him because he really did want to do it. He was just reluctant. And also signed him up for like a bunch of politicians' newsletters.
As someone who has done that to an ex, I can say it is very gratifying.
So there's a part on Reddit that's called "Am I the
a-hole?"
A-hole.
Yeah.
Thing, and she writes into that so that the entire internet can declare him the a-hole. So yes, it's all stuff that is satisfying and petty, but not actually like harmful or mean. or I guess opinion on that could differ. But in my mind, it didn't cross any sort of lines that would make her less sympathetic to me, at least. But obviously I wrote her, so I'm kind of biased. I love her.
Yeah, she's I of most of your leading ladies, or all of your leading ladies, I think she's one of my favorites. She feels, not that they don't all feel real, but she does feel like she's got like that extra like 3D-ness about her. Especially when she has to deal with like her mental health towards the middle of the book. And I actually wanted to talk to you about that too, because I felt like that was really well written and well researched. And I kind of wanted to know like where you came to that, did you do like some research? Did you have any friends who may have struggled this way?
Well, first I should say that part of the reason the main thing that sort of drew me to writing Athena was that I realized that pretty much all of my recent female main characters had been very together. Like, even if they weren't entirely sure of their future path or were between jobs, they just fundamentally, they were going to be fine no matter what. And I decided that I would really like to write a messy sort of female main character, who was sort of unsure about everything in her life, basically destabilized from everything in her life, including work, personal relationships, where she lives, all of that. And that all of those things would work together with some things that she hadn't really addressed in her own head, that she'd been sort of running from by overworking or by throwing herself into her wedding that didn't happen. She had sort of avoided the issue of the fact that she was increasingly depressed. And so part of what the story is about is about that as well, because she does have a depressive episode, because basically everything stabilizing in her life has been taken away from her at this point. And right, as far as how I did that, I mean, I read things obviously in newspapers and things like that, but frankly it was from my own personal experience, like much more so than most of my other books. Like Athena and that portion of things is sort of ripped directly from my heart. It wasn't a hard book to write in the sense that the words came relatively easily, but it was a hard book to write emotionally. And part of that was because, you know about a year into the pandemic, I got super depressed. And some of the things that Athena experiences are things I experience too. And I think sometimes, as I think Tessa Dare once said, you write what you need to read. And it was important for me to write a female main character who was struggling and messy, and sort of assert that she's still worthy of love and can be loved despite that.
Yeah. As someone who's been through a very similar situation, and I have a lot of friends who are also depressed, and we've all had our episodes, and I think it was really good that Athena pulled herself out of it, but also that there was somebody there, Matthew, who was able to be gentle with her while it was happening.
Right.
And that helped her be gentle with herself, even going forwards. I think we all hope that somebody's like that, somebody will be there for us like that. So,
And because of some of the things that Matthew has done to destabilize her life, I think it was important for him to show up for her in that way, because he is a character who would care that, like, he helped sort of bring her to that spot. Even though it wasn't all him. There was a lot of other stuff happening. He was just an easy person to blame for her. But yeah, it was important to me. The scene sort of toward the center of the book where he kind of shows up for her in a big way was one of the 2 or 3 scenes that I knew I wanted to write from the beginning of the book. Like, I plot everything else out before I start that. Usually I have 1 or 2 scenes in mind where I really wanted to write them, and that was one of them. But it was also important to me that he be loving and be there for her, but that I wanted to be clear that, like, that doesn't solve depression.
no,
Like,
yeah,
that
no.
his love alone is not going to fix things. There are things she has to deal with, in her case, medication and therapy, and sort of reframing her thoughts in various ways. And that's going to take time. It's not something where, like, he's going to be like, no, your thoughts are not accurate about yourself. And she'd be like, you're right.
Yeah,
I
it's not
feel
like
great
that.
now.
It's not like you're cured. But he does help her like set her feet on the right path. And I think that was a
Right,
very, that was the best way I think you could have written that. And that
right,
was the way that's the way it should happen. That's the way, sometimes you just need someone to turn you a little bit. Be
right,
like, the road is there. You should head that way. Um,
right.
yeah, so that I did love that part of the book. It caught me a little off guard because we don't usually see that in romance novels, but I think it was important for it to be there. And I do like that she's messy.
Yeah. I mean, that was having a female main character who had a depressive episode, that was messy and depressive episode, which is like, yay, rom-com. I swear it is funny as well.
Yes. And it is funny. I like that she also had to educate him on meme culture, which I thought was great because at some point Athena calls into the radio station and rickrolls him. And I think that's so funny. And he's like upset not because he's been rickrolled, but because he doesn't like the song.
But has no idea why anyone would, like, does not know about Rick Rolling, has no idea why anyone would actually dedicate that song to him,
Yeah,
and wonders whether it was like a declaration of affection.
that was so funny. Yeah, really good to have that comedy in there. You got to balance it, right?
Yes.
Speaking of Matthew, I did want to talk a little bit about how you shaped his character because again, this is a romance novel and he doesn't have a lot of experience in that department. So how did you like come to shape him to be like this? Where did he come from?
When I sort of looked at how I wanted things to happen, he had to have a good reason for breaking up the wedding. And that meant that sort of his sort of sense of sort of quasi-parental responsibility for his younger brother, Johnny, her ex-fiance, had to be very powerful. Like his sense of responsibility toward Johnny and sort of how he allows Johnny, even as an adult, to sort of rely on him very heavily. There had to be powerful reasons for that. So that's why I sort of, work through his backstory. And then having done that with him basically having raised his younger brother since he was 8, I thought to myself, originally it was not my intent to make him quite as inexperienced as he is. But then I sort of tried to picture in my head, because I always like to think about what are their exes like. And I tried to think of what Matthew's ex would be. And I'm like, when would he have time?
Yeah.
When would he have time between, like, he is going to medical school and raising his younger brother and then starting like the medical profession and then making his own practice and then getting his younger brother through school and getting his younger brother into med school and then helping his younger brother in the practice too. Like when, like the sort of man that I had sort of created, when would he have time to date?
Yeah. Especially with
And I
medical
was,
school and quasi-parenting, exactly what you say. Yeah. It sounds like his life was very hard. And when do you have time when you're not taking care of yourself too?
right. And so I could not think of a plausible. I mean, I guess I could have said, well, he had sort of brief relationships here and there, but he just not, as I created him, he wasn't someone who would enjoy casual relationships. Like that wouldn't be something he would enjoy. So he would want someone that, and it just didn't make sense to me. Like when I started trying to think through what an ex would be like for him, I couldn't I couldn't come up with something. So I was like, well, here we go. But I didn't, I'll just say it because I guess at this point we sort of danced around it, like that he's not had sex before.
Mm.
But I also didn't want to somehow fetishize that. So like we have a little fun with it, but I didn't want it to be like a huge deal either. So I wasn't like harping on it from the beginning, like he's not bemoaning his state like throughout the book. It's just a fact. Some people get older in their lives and for whatever reason, don't have a lot of sexual experience, and he's one of them. And like, Athena sort of enjoys teaching him a little bit, but it's not like I tried not to sort of fetishize it either.
I think you did a good job of that. Yeah. I think he feels believable just like Athena does. And when you do look at like the way you have his life plotted out, how we learn about it in the book, it makes sense. Yeah. Speaking of our two leads, how do you balance the forces that keep them together and also keep them separate? So for like most of the book, a lot of what keeps them apart is Johnny himself. And you know, the situation of the broken up engagement. And then what brings them together, at least in my head, what brought them together was, you know, they start to kind of have a little bit of fun together. They start to talk more like they did at the museum at the beginning of the book. They learn more about each other. But like, how do you balance that in this kind of book?
In my headcanon, you know, death of the author, the whole idea that, you know, once you've written a book, it is no longer yours. The book is however you conceive it to be when you read it, that's the book. So my intentions matter less than what's however you read it. But said, my headcanon for my own book was that if had Athena not already been engaged when they met at the engagement party, that it essentially was very close to love at first sight for both of them, but that she's engaged already. And things are messy already because unbeknownst, you know, without actually meeting her, he's been trying to convince his brother to end the relationship for a variety of reasons. And so I think I tried to play it in the book that there is always sort of an intellectual and physical attraction there, but that's those things that was undercut for a long time by first the fact that she's engaged to his brother and is not going to do anything to jeopardize that or be unfaithful to his brother, and the fact that she realizes he's been kind of saying not nice things about her. So like attraction has a hard time existing within that. And then there's the fact that she a lot of her sort of despair over her life, instead of sort of acknowledging that part of this is depression, he's sort of an easy thing to point to say, you caused this.
Yeah.
You know, and so it's hard to sort of have a relationship then. On his part, what's keeping them apart is if you've convinced your younger brother to leave her, how do you say to your younger brother, I convinced you to cancel the wedding and end the engagement, but now I would like to date her? Which
So messy.
how do you so messy? So for him, there's a real sense of that she's someone he cannot have. You know, as much as, again, from basically first meeting her, for the moment he meets her, she's already out of his reach because she's engaged to his brother. So even when she's no longer engaged, he still perceives her as being someone who, as much as he may care about her and be attracted to her, that he cannot act on that,
Right.
because it would be a betrayal of his brother. And so what brings them together is, I think, when he sees sort of her need, that she needs someone, and that for a variety of reasons, he is that someone who can be there for her when she is sort of at her lowest and struggling, and that he wants to be there for her. That's sort of the time when he begins to open himself up more to her, and eventually to the possibility of a relationship with her. And for her sake, she can't really go there with Matthew until she is sort of at a point where she's got her head a little bit more together, so she can feel attraction and like a lot of things about him. But I didn't feel great about them acting on that until she was sort of in a place where, and I don't think he would want to act on it until, that's why they did not get together until she was actually feeling better.
Yeah.
Because I think he would want to be very careful not to take advantage of her. And I think that until she got her head together, sometimes like romance and would not have been like top on her list. However, she was drawn to him, even though she was drawn to him. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think it does. I just like talking about this book with you, so I'm enjoying any answer you give me. I was gonna also say, I made the comment at my title swap yesterday that this was one of your longer books, but then I went and looked at actually how long all your books are, and this is like average for you, 400 pages. But for a romance novel or a rom-com, 400 pages, pretty long. A lot of them are like less than 300. I think it works with your writing. I'm not complaining about the length, believe me. But in this book, I did notice that the characters really get together like 3/4 of the way through the book. And I feel like in your earlier books, like especially Shipwrecked, which is, I mean, they do get together officially later in Shipwreck, but they kind of hook up 3 pages into the book, 5 pages into something like that.
Oh, first page, they're hooking up.
So
Page
see, I'm
one.
wrong. First page, we have the sex scene. And in this book, it was like 280, 300 pages in. So I think I like that you can balance that. Like you write a good story regardless of where you put your scene. You know, like I was still interested in following these two characters throughout without like the titillation at the beginning, basically.
To me, the first parts of the book, before they actually have sort of physical intimacy, to me it was still super romantic. That even though they're not together in the sense that there's no physical intimacy, their lives are very intertwined and they're in each other's sort of lives and space and learning about each other and sort of fighting attraction on his part, a certain amount of attraction on hers, but also sort of learning about him and who he is. So to me, even though officially, I guess you can say they don't get together sort of romantically in a sense of physical intimacy until that far in the book. I mean, I guess my intent was, whether it comes through or not, for it to feel romantic even earlier though. Hopefully. But the story to me, whatever story I've created will tell me when sex makes sense, when kissing and sex and sort of intimacy makes sense within the story. And I just couldn't see how the characters as I drew them just would not have had, particularly Matthew, I would say. Athena, particularly when she wasn't doing well, may have been sort of reckless and kind of careless with herself, that maybe she would have, but I think she would have maybe hated herself for it afterwards. I didn't want to write that, and I don't think he would have before that time. So you kind of got to do I feel like what the characters sort of demand and the plot that you've created, that sort of determines when there's physical intimacy. When the intimacy happens, I try to keep sort of a reliable level of heat. But where that intimacy will happen and when may shift depending on the book. Because I do try to sort of individualize the books based on the story I'm telling and the characters in it, rather than having sort of set at 50% you must do X is not really how I write. So yeah.
When I used to work in teens and I would have parents be like concerned about like, well, is there a scene in this? I'd be like, all right, well, the book's 280 pages, turn to page 210. And if there's a sex scene, like, so you're right, like you could fall into a formulaic kind of thing. And sometimes that has happened with books. I like that you don't do that. And I was pleasantly surprised by how like the slow burn of this book. I think exactly what you're saying, that like it suited the characters better to like, they need to start, first of all, they're enemies at the beginning. You know, they don't hate each other, but like they're definitely on opposite ends of like this conflict that they have about the marriage and the cancellation of this. And so they kind of have to work their way even to tolerating each other, and then liking each other, and then liking each other. So, you know, you're right. Yeah, it makes sense. Each story has its own timeline and you have to make sense of it.
You know, sometimes it works the other way, like the book that I'm in the midst of editing. At one point, I guess I don't even know what percentage I was through the story, but I'd intended it to be a kissing scene. And then I was like, why aren't they having sex? Like, is there a reason they're not having sex? I'm like, there's no reason they're not having sex, because it's what's keeping them apart is more external actiony stuff rather than sort of anything keeping them apart internally. So I'm like, if they've got a shot at it. So I was like, all right, here we go.
Well, why not? Is that going to be your second Harlot's Bay book?
It's actually going to be my first in a paranormal series for
Oh,
Berkeley
right. We talked about that a little
called,
bit last time.
yeah, Zomrom-com. So
Zom, zom,
yes,
zom.
yes. So yeah, that one, that's what I'm editing right now.
Okay,
So
cool. Yeah, I'm excited because I got to the end of At First Bite and was like, the next book comes out fall this year. What's happening? So I'm really excited for that one to come. Let me ask you about this. I am curious about where you got your names for Harlot's Bay and what's that place, the Slattern something or other. I'm blanking. I just finished the book 2 days.
Strumpet Square,
That's what it is.
Strumpet Square Media.
Where? Yes.
I just, I I I was doing sort of like my version of a small town sort of setting,
Hmm.
but I'm really not the sort of person who's going to do, I want to have fun with it. If you're going to make up a small town setting, like you might as well have some fun with it. And so I decided that it would be sort of a town for runaway women eventually, and eventually obviously like non-binary people and other people as well, and men and so forth, and people of all genders. But it was founded by runaway women sort of who'd burned down their lives in some fashion and were rebuilding. And I just really like that idea. And I also got to have a lot of fun with sort of old-timey insults for women that they reclaimed. And so, that it was Harlot's Bay and the Strumpet Square, and um there's in Maryland at the historic area of St. Mary's County, they have like an old ship, like a reproduction of an old ship called the Maryland Dove.
Okay.
And I was like, well, this would be called clearly the Maryland Virago. Well, all these I just had a lot of fun with old-timey insults for women that get reclaimed. My books that are self-published, my publisher name is Hussies and Harpies Press. So
I love that.
yeah.
That's so funny.
So
Well, and in our previous interview too, we did talk about the harpy thing. I'm still gonna make a t-shirt. It's gonna happen eventually. I'll wear it to work. They'll love that at the library. But actually it's funny that you made your town history be that women ran away from their problems to go here, and that's exactly what Athena does. So
right,
she was in the right place. She needed to be there.
right. And I thought it would be sort of fun to have that sort of synchronicity within it. And because I'm me, I had I did research like Maryland history and be like, well, when would this occur? And there's a lot that I cut out. Like I had a couple pages of it. My editor's like, Olivia,
The
you
special
need to
interest is showing. Pull
cut
it
this
back.
down. I'm like, if you want like a multi-page treatise on how the shipyard me about it. I can talk about coastal trade right there. I'm like, no, it's a romance. I can't.
I think you already pushed the envelope by even talking about a spite house and doing a whole book about spite houses. Every time I hand sell this book, which has been a few times, even though I don't have it yet in hand, I'm always like, it's coming. I've had to say like, oh, it's about a woman who buys a spite house, and people look at me like I'm nuts. And I'm like, well, a spite house is, here's the history. And then people are like, that's actually very funny. I know it is. So
And
yeah,
multiple towns have them. Like it's not just, I mean, the most famous one is the one in Boston,
right.
also called the Skinny House.
Mhm.
And that's sort of how I pictured the setup for for Athena's and Matthew's and Johnny's row homes. But I mean, a lot of towns have them because, I mean, people are people, and property law is weird. And a lot of them, my agent sent me a TikTok about this woman who has this wedge-shaped home
Oh
that
God.
apparently she and her husband divorced, and she didn't get half the house, but she got like part of the property. And so she built this like tiny wedge-shaped house to like basically block his view out the front of this house.
Good for her.
So I mean, it is a spite house, so
White House.
it happens. And like sometimes there's neighbors who have disputes, and there's all sorts of stuff that happens. So
Yeah.
I had some fun researching that. So
Another thing I noticed I liked, you had a 5 year later epilogue, which I usually don't like. And for once I was like, no, this is good because now we see them like where they should be, where they're supposed to
right.
be. And not to like give anything away because you should read the book and then get to the 5 year epilogue. But I enjoyed, again, usually I'm like, oh great, like 5 years later, where are they? But for once I was like, no, I want to know. I want to know where these people are. I want to know where they landed, you know?
I think because both of them sort of had to sort of go through a lot to reach their happily ever after.
Yeah.
And that, some of this stuff happened later in the book. Like as you said, the relationship happens, the more intimate, overtly romantic part of the relationship happens later in the book. I think it was important to like show that this is not going to fall apart as something happens with his brother. Or I
Right.
wanted to sort of revisit them a few years later where she's in a better place, where he's in a better place, and that they're together and happy. Like I'm not a big fan of like baby logs. Like the epilogues where it's like, oh, we're having a baby, and like that's just not really what I do. But it was I first of all, I actually do. I love epilogues. Like I love epilogues. I love prologues. I love all of it. But and readers often do like to see the couple sort of happy later. But in this case, I thought it was particularly important. But just because of the structure of the book, and sort of everything they'd overcome to sort of see them later to cement the happy ending
Right.
more firmly.
Gotcha. I think what you just said is my opinion. I don't like baby logs. I think that's
Yeah.
exactly what it is. Because I just read a book and I will not name names. We will not slander
Mhm.
another book. But I just read a book and it was like 3 years later, oh, we have a baby. And I was like, no, I don't like this anymore. Like I liked it and then you did that. Now like you've lost half a star in my rating because I don't like it.
I love my own kid who's 14 now. But to me, babies are the antithesis of romance for me personally. Children in general, I just find it makes, I mean, that said, like I think it can be done. It's just not my natural
Yeah.
inclination. Um, my friend and extremely talented writer, she used to write as Ruby Lane, but she wrote a new book as Opal Way called Wildlife. It just came out like a week or two ago, and um it has my favorite baby log of all time because it's not a human baby. It's an homage to Bringing Up Baby.
Okay.
And so like there's a baby log, but it's not a human baby. So I was like, this is my favorite baby log
That's really funny.
of all
I
time.
will have
I
to
love her
look into
very
that.
much.
That's great. I'll have to go find that book. Maybe we already have it here at the library.
You may. You may. It got some good. I mean, she is super talented. So
Yeah, I got so excited because again, a year ago, pretty much almost to the day, we talked about At First Spite. And then I saw it like it showed up in one of the journals like a few months ago, and I was like, ah! And I grabbed it, literally ran over to my supervisor, like, they got a starred review. I'm so excited.
oh, library journal. That made me
Yes,
super happy.
it was,
That
yeah,
made
it
me
was
very,
library
very
journal.
happy.
And then Library Reads this month put it on their thing too. And again, I was like, it's happening. I think we should probably call this while we're on the high because we've been talking for half an hour. And yeah, is there anything else you want to tell us about At First Spite?
It's out on the February 13th, so it will have been out a couple days by the time this goes live. And for all the serious stuff that we talked about, I also think it's very, very funny. My goal for the book was for it to be sort of emotionally rich in every way, that it be sort of there might be some hard parts emotionally, but I think there's a lot of places where you can laugh too. And I think it's a warm and sweet book about found family, as well as about all the other things that we discussed, including pranking someone by contacting level marketing companies. And thank you to everyone who reads it. I'm really proud of this book. I think it's some of the best writing I've ever done. And if you read it, I hope you love it.
Well, I thought it was excellent. I did love it. So I'm so happy we got to talk to you about it today and that we covered so many great topics. And I guess that's it for this episode of Turn the Page. Thank you all for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.